On this side of the House, we can affirm clearly that we will stand with Ukraine with everything necessary for as long as necessary.
Actually, we are the only party that has stood with Ukraine, Mr. Speaker, rather than trying to impose a carbon tax.
Conservatives are rejecting claims today that they no longer support Ukraine, but they continue to oppose a bill that updates the Canada-Ukraine free trade deal as long as it mentions the phrase carbon pricing. Now, that language is non-binding, and the deal has been signed off by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky himself. Now, Conservatives have a chance to change their mind as the bill heads for a final vote in the House of Commons. Ihor Michalchyshyn is the CEO of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, and he joins me now. Ihor, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Your organization has expressed disappointment for the Conservatives voting against it. Has anyone inside the Conservative Party given your group a clear explanation as to why they're voting against this?
Well, we've talked to several MPs about their position. We were at committee. I was at committee a couple of weeks ago. This wasn't an issue at the committee when I was there for an hour. We've talked a lot about the history of Ukraine and Canada free trade, the benefits that it'll have. So we haven't, we're encouraging people to contact their MP to express their views. But in terms of that direct explanation, that conversation hasn't happened.
So it wasn't an issue when you were at committee. Do you have any idea why it's suddenly become an issue now?
I have to let the politicians speak for themselves in terms of the issues they're raising. When I was at committee, we talked about the way that Canada and Ukraine have strong agricultural ties, strong people-to-people ties. And frankly, I was at this Rebuild Ukraine conference a couple of weeks ago, or last week, sorry. There's huge potential for investment in terms of rebuilding Ukraine. The potential for Canadian companies there is enormous. And again, for Ukrainians to come here to bring their skills, their high-tech skills particularly, that's what we've been talking about. So these new issues are new ones for us.
So you heard it there in the clip from Mr. Poilievre, and there's been videos put out by Conservatives on this, saying that this imposes a carbon tax on Ukraine, which Ukraine says is categorically untrue, because I believe they've had carbon pricing since about 2011. Why do you think they persist on this argument that this is an imposition of a carbon price scheme on Ukraine?
Well, I think the Ukrainian government has spoken very clearly that they want this free trade agreement. This is modernization of an existing free trade agreement. They want an expansion of it, which includes services and more scope for what free trade framework can be covered. I think looking at the big picture, we need to see that helping Ukraine to rebuild their economy is going to be good for Canada and good for Ukraine. These kind of political debates about the nuances or the wording in it, neglects the big picture, which is to say, like, we are needing to be Ukraine's greatest ally. It is also potentially a huge economic opportunity for us. And so I think that our community feels, and we have for weeks and months followed this legislation, that this is a great opportunity for Canada, which enhances our international trading potential.
Right. So you say you started a campaign, a social media campaign, to try to get MPs to vote in favor of this after the Conservatives voted against it en masse. After everything of the last couple of years, did you think you'd get to a point where you'd have to take a social media action like this to try to convince Canadian parliamentarians to support a trade deal with Ukraine?
I mean, it's part of the work we do as the Federation of the Community. We're always looking for a consensus on Ukraine, whether it's humanitarian or military or trade. We think Canada, as part of an international alliance through NATO, through the partner countries that support Ukraine, through the military agreement, we think we're stronger. We send the right signal to Ukraine when we are stronger, united. We think it sends a bad signal to Russia when we see dissent and sort of division on Ukraine.
So I wonder, the consensus to this point on Ukraine has been solid in Canada. And even now, in the midst of this debate, the parties all say they still support Ukraine. But if this sort of a debate is happening, and there is a chunk of the electorate out there that complains about the amount of money Canada sends, the amount of aid Canada sends, they may skew a little bit pro-Russia based on misinformation. Does any of this, like in terms of making it about the imposition of a carbon tax, does any of this threaten that consensus in any way? Are you worried about a ripple effect?
I think what we've seen is that through the public, that there's nearly 75–80% of Canadians continue to support Ukraine and Canada's support for Ukraine. So we don't see that number really changing. But I think these debates are important in terms of kind of bringing forward the various sectors, the various ways in which we can do it. Individuals are helping. We've seen 9 or 10 or more Canadians killed in action in Ukraine who've gone to serve. I know as recently as last week. We see, I think this weekend there were 75 drone attacks on Kyiv, and the capital of Ukraine. So, I mean, the war is real. The political leadership from our MPs have been there. The Prime Minister's been there. They see this. I think we need to remember the big picture, which is helping Ukraine win the war, and then I think helping them prosper as part of the EU and as part of a strong partnership with Canada.
You mentioned, though, division sends a bad message to Russia. I mean, what message would a lack of support for a modernized free trade agreement send to Russia, do you think?
Well, I think on anything, we strive for unanimity because we know that Canada's Parliament speaks stronger when it speaks together on Ukraine, on other issues. We're going to see this bill go to the Senate eventually as well, so we're going to be looking to see what happens there. Again, I think the broad swath of Canadian society, agrees with more support for Ukraine. There are kind of outliers, and we think that the impact of these kind of votes speaks for itself in terms of how people, as you said, how people reflect on their support and their particular vote.
You mentioned the war, and it's been a while since we spoke, because really since October 7th, the global security focus of the world has really shifted to Israel and Hamas. What concerns do you have about that? That we've seen the U.S., for example, they've come up with an aid package for Israel, but Biden's hope of getting money for Ukraine is kind of stalled. Are the sands shifting in a way that you're worried about here?
I think the worry is how to help Ukraine now win the war. We've talked about this before, that we're supporting them enough that they're not losing the war militarily. And I talk about all the international military coalition that is helping Ukraine with munitions, with now aircraft, with training, with everything. But we haven't helped them enough to win it. And this is going to be the second winter where we're going to see huge missile attacks on energy infrastructure, on civilian populations, and it's a horrible movie we've seen before, and we're going to see it again. And so I think our focus is on helping Ukraine win with a tactical advantage, which is air defense, which protects civilians, which helps people to live their lives there. Again, just this weekend, a couple of days ago, a village was bombed in Ukraine. 3 civilians died, 7-year-old girl dies. That's now background noise. I mean, I think we've unfortunately seen the war in Ukraine become normalized. As he said, since October 7th, the news about Israel was extremely shocking, and now is becoming part of the daily newscast.
Yeah. Ihor Michalchyshyn, always appreciate it when you come in. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.